So you've already given all that stuff. I don't need to go over all this again. The only thing I would add is that I used to get paid to be a spy. In a previous career, I was there with Air Force Intelligence. I know the military intelligence jokes. Ha ha ha. Let's just assume that I've heard them. When I first wrote this talk, it was as a keynote for a conference, and what they do for that kind of thing is they say, we want to know we want a title and maybe an abstract, but we don't necessarily need the whole thing right away. So what the title they came up with was All You Jokers, thinking that I would be talking about all the things that we as developers do in our organizations over and over again, expecting different results from our organizations and how we need to change what we're doing. You know, the definition of insanity being doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. But as I wrote the talk, I realized that these behaviors that I was going to talk about are actually very rational responses to the incentives that the organizations give to us. I realized that the joke is actually on us, and the organization is playing the joke on us. So what we're going to be talking about today is organizational behaviors and the typical developer responses to those organizational behaviors, and then hopefully ways that we can modify our responses and hopefully modify the way the organization treats us as a result. Does all that kind of make sense? That's the thrust of everything we're going to be doing today. So in order to talk about organizational behaviors, we have to talk about organizational structures to begin with. In the lead up to this talk, before the recording, we were talking a lot about Steve McConnell, Code Complete, software estimation, stuff like that. He's got another book called Professional Software Development. And in that book, he talks about two, what he calls platonic ideal forms of organizations. The first one is what he calls the commitment-oriented organization. The second one is what he calls the process-oriented organization. We'll go over those in some detail in a moment. But he also talks about a third kind. Those first two, the commitment and the process-oriented, are totally reasonable organizations. They seem like complete opposites, but really they're just orthogonal to each other. But there is a third form of organization that he talks about, the cargo cult organization, that we will also talk about. And this is the one where we start seeing organizational problems showing up. So I'm going to describe the commitment-oriented organization here, and while I'm describing it, I want you to think about whether you think you belong to this kind of organization or not. In the commitment-oriented organization, the people who are running the business or running the organization say to themselves, we've got a particular problem, but we know that we are not necessarily competent to solve that problem. What we're going to do is we're going to go out and find the absolute best programmers we can get. And they use terms like the hero developer or the rock star developer. I am not a fan of those terms. I figure if you're a rock star developer, like my friend Cal Evans says, what that means is you go to the office, you trash the place, you break all the windows, and you charge them $1 million and you walk out. You know, that's a rock star developer. Or an individual empowerment is the one I prefer. So they get the best possible people they can find, and then describe the problem, and give them near complete autonomy and authority to do the things that they think they need to do in order to solve the problem, or to write the programs. Which means they have very wide decision-making authority on a whole range of stuff. What tools they're going to use, what the schedule is going to be, what's going to get delivered and what's not going to be delivered. Everything you can possibly think about the project is in the hands of the developers. What this means is that the developers then, having committed to the organization in this way, having been given this authority and autonomy, make a lot of voluntary personal sacrifices in order to make these things happen, because the developers know if the project is a success, then it's their success. And if it is a failure, it is their failure. They have been the ones charged with everything about it. So they're highly motivated to put in 60-hour work weeks, sleep under the desk, you know, they stay at the foosball table there, eat their meals in at the office, because they're the ones that are in charge of the whole thing. Now, I want you to think about this, especially the part about having wide authority and broad autonomy, but then also this very high level of work weeks, you know, 60-hour work weeks, that kind of thing. Who here belongs to what is described here as a commitment-oriented organization? Kinda. Some people. What do you do?
I'm just an apprentice software developer. That's all.
So what does the company do?
It does custom software development. So we have one project right now, and come in.
And the whole business depends on it coming through.
Yep.
And
yeah. We get to do it how we want,
as long as you get it done. Right on. We're going to talk more about, you might actually be part of a cargo cult organization, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yes, I work at a consultancy. Most of the projects we're on, we have like 80 developers total. Most of the projects we're on just have like 2 or 3 developers, and the developers kind of function as the project manager. They get support from a project strategist.
Right.
Who would kind of function as the project managers. Like we work with the to-do list, the list of stories. I think we have a bit more support for work-life balance and shorter work weeks. That's been my experience so far.
Right.
So crossing fingers.
Right. So we will come back to. I will ask again when we talk about the process-oriented organization. But those are both reasonable answers. Generally, what I hear is agile startup for this kind of thing, where the people who are the developers are also the ones actually running the startup, so they have a real commitment to begin with. Believe it or not, Microsoft works like this in a lot of ways. And I know it's a gigantic organization, or it seems like, looking at it from the outside, like this monolithic thing, but it's really a bunch of independent sub-organizations that have a lot of autonomy and authority within the Microsoft, or under the Microsoft umbrella. Google used to work this way. I don't know if they do anymore. So McConnell talks about a different kind of organization. And at first, this sounds like the exact opposite of the commitment-oriented organization. I'm going to submit to you instead that it is at right angles. They're just not on the same plane at all. The process-oriented organization works like this. First of all, the developers are not the ones in charge. There is a huge amount of planning and specifications that goes into this. The developers are part of this planning operation, but they're not the ones driving it. Actually, other business concerns are driving it. So because there's a lot of planning and specification work that goes into the development practice in the first place, what that means is that this kind of organization is very, very interested in doing whatever the best possible practice is for whatever the kind of software is that they're writing. Their development processes, as a result, in it being very regular and methodical. There's no such thing as, for example, as fixing a bug in this kind of organization. First you have the bug report comes in, then we have a meeting about whether it's a bug or not. Then we have a meeting about what we're going to do to fix the bug. Then we have a meeting about what we're going to have to test. Then someone writes the test. Then we have a meeting about the test. Then someone writes the fix. You see where I'm going. Everything is very regular and methodical. And at the very end, we figure out, yes, it's been fixed, it gets put into production, whatever, as part of a standardized process for everything. So there's very little autonomy, there's very little authority here on the part of the developers. But what you get as a result of that is continuous improvement of the business processes. So if anything ever goes wrong in that bug fixing chain, everyone stops what they're doing, steps back, looks at what went wrong, and said, how can we make sure this never ever goes wrong again? And that becomes part of the standardized process. It's very administrative and bureaucratic, not because we want to cover our asses exactly, but because it's very important that the software be delivered correctly the first time, probably because people's lives are depending on it, or huge amounts of finances are depending on it. It's very documentation heavy and very meeting heavy, not because we want to have documentation for its own sake, and not because we enjoy reinforcing our status within the hierarchy, but because it's very important that everyone knows what everyone else is doing, where we are on the schedule, and whether the schedule is going to be met or not, and how far we have to push it. So there's, like I said, a lot of attention to timing the schedule. All these different pieces that are being developed in parallel all have to merge together at exactly the right time in order for everything to work. Now, not much authority, not much autonomy. But because you are essentially a cog in a machine, a very intelligent and necessary cog, but only one in a gigantic machine, you work a 40-hour work week. You don't do 60-hour or 80-hour weeks. Everything is regular and methodical, and for that you get a 40-hour work week. Now, who believes they operate in an organization like this? So where are you at? What do you do?
NCR.
So you're at NCR. Financials. Everyone's very, very careful about money. We want to make sure that if something goes wrong, that people don't lose millions of dollars, right? So again, NASA, IBM, NASA, if the software goes wrong, something really bad happens to the rocket. IBM, something goes wrong, people lose billions of dollars in a second, that kind of thing. Medical, I had someone in this talk, I think it was at the Atlanta talk, say they work on class 2 medical devices. You bet they're process oriented, because if the anesthesia being delivered, the software delivering the anesthesia stops working properly, someone stays on the table. That's not what you want. So, commitment-oriented, process-oriented. These both sound great. They are ideal forms. Unfortunately, there is something else called the cargo cult mix of these two organizations. So first of all, who has heard the term cargo cult before? A couple. Okay, a couple. There is what you want to do is go out to the web, Google, DuckDuck, whatever, and Google for cargo cult science. There's an essay by a guy named Richard Feynman who worked on the atom bomb in the 40s. where he talks about science as a methodology and what happens when people stop treating it properly as that methodology. The analogy he uses is of, again, World War II, where the Americans are fighting the war in the Pacific, but we need to get a lot of men and material out there so that we can actually fight the war. So what would happen is a ship would pull up on an island. The natives see the ship pull up, and they start seeing it unload. They see the people on the ship start unloading all this stuff, and they build a runway, and they build a tower, and they build a radar. And then suddenly these airplanes start flying down, landing, and unloading more wealth and material goods than the natives have ever seen for the entire history of the island. So they see this happening, but then the war's over. The planes fly away, nothing comes back. They pull up all the runways and stuff. But the natives, having become used to the idea that this stuff exists out there, they decide they want the planes to come back. So what do? They start cutting down their bamboo trees, and they make themselves a bamboo runway. They build a bamboo tower. They put a guy with bamboo headset in there, and they wait for the planes to arrive, because this is all they ever saw. Well, they've followed the pattern. They've looked at, they're following what they've seen, but something essential is missing from making all of that work. That's the idea behind cargo culting. So here we're going to talk about a cargo cult organization. What happens with this is that organizational managers look at the ideal, or look at the two different ideals, the commitment and the process, and they start picking different parts from each one and trying to mix them together. So we're going to build an organization where you as the developer don't have a lot of autonomy or authority. We as the manager want to control you. But we need you to commit to the organization for the good of the organization, because we've seen commitment in other places. There's a lot of schedule pressure. So we as the managers are going to set the schedule, but then we're going to demand from you a commitment to meet the schedule that we set. Again, in the commitment style, you would be setting the schedule. So they're mixing and matching here. And if the estimate gets missed, guess who has to deal with that? Not the people who set the estimate. You have to deal with it. So the organizational management style is top-down until the schedule begins to slip. And then when the top-down management realizes, wait a minute, we're not going to make it in time, suddenly now we need you to be a hero and a rock star and help the organization and do whatever is necessary to get the project out on time. It's very documentation heavy and meeting heavy, not because we've got a bunch of different parts that are all moving that all have to intersect at the same time, but because we need to cover our butts. We need to make sure that you're working on the thing you're supposed to be working on, and we need you to document that you're working on it, you're using the right number of hours, how many hours you used, and why aren't you doing what we told you to do? At the end of all of this, we realize that there is, in this kind of organization, there is no way for you to exceed anyone's expectations. If the expectation from management is for you to do what you're told when you're told, and then for you to do absolutely everything necessary in order to make a project successful when they realize it's not working, how do you exceed expectations on that? There's no way. And when you're done, let's say you do it. Let's say you actually pull them out of the fire. What reward do you get for that? Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's great. You saved the company. Here's your next project. And one of the follow-on problems of this is that there's no feedback loop. If the people who are setting you up for failure never feel the pain of their own failures, they're just going to keep doing the same stuff over and over again, and it repeats over and over. The organization never learns. So why do we do this? Why does it happen this way? Again, I said this earlier. It's because the people who are building the organization look at IBM and they say, look, IBM is very process-oriented. They've got a lot of meetings, they've got a lot of documentation, there's a lot of top-down direction. Oh, but look at Google over here. Their guys are committed. They're spending 60-hour work weeks on a cot under the table. We'll just take, they're both successful companies, right? We'll just take the best parts of each of those, we'll put them together, and our organization will work properly.
And we do Agile Fall too.
Say it again? Agile Fall, yes, exactly. So, and again, this part of Agile is awesome. We love that, but we want all to be able to know in advance everything that's going to plan it all out in advance, so we know what's going on. What's the failure here is this, and this is a very normal human behavior, to look at the things you like and try to combine them. The problem is that each of those ideal forms is not merely a list of stuff to do. It is a system. It is an ecology, if you will, where there are feedback loops built into it to keep it all under control and to keep everything lined up. It's like Jurassic Park. If you take the dinosaurs from one era and put them with the plants of another, suddenly everything's chaos and everything blows up. So they've each got feedback loops of their own. They each have trade-offs of their own. And that's what's missing here. This is why the cargo cult organization is so stressful and horrifying to work for. The upshot of all of this in the cargo cult organization is that there is a very bad power imbalance between the people who are giving orders, and I'm not trying to be adversarial here, but this is the way it ends up being. The people who are running the management, making decisions, end up having a whole lot of power over the developers, getting a lot of stuff free from the developers. So for example, the decision makers get all the upside if a project succeeds. If I, as the manager, say, I need it by date X, and it comes through on date X, I'm a genius. I'm great as the manager because my prediction came true. Everything happened the way. But if it doesn't go through, I, as the decision maker, say, well, you know, we need the developers to do this. We need them to come. They feel none of the downside of a bad decision. Again, failure is rested on the back of those who do not make the decisions. If you're involved in the process, that's one thing. But if you're not involved in it, you're the one who's catching hell. And if you've got to work on weekends to make the schedule go through, who's there working on the weekends? The person who made the decision? No, it's you. And there's no incentive for the organization to change. They're insulated from their failures. They're essentially trying to get stuff for free from you. They want commitment from you. They want commitment from us without giving us the commensurate authority that goes along with commitment in a commitment-oriented organization. But you're a good person, right? You're loyal, you're faithful, you're true, you're honorable. You want to be seen as the kind of person who can be depended on. They're using your goodwill against you, and you suffer through this because you want to maintain this image of yourself as a dependable, honorable person. So why is it we see this happening all the time? Why is it none of this ever changes? It's because we don't talk about it. You know, there's this book called The Inmates Are Running the Asylum where we're the inmates. We're the ones who actually have skin in the game, who can make things happen. So we talk about the technology of making things happen. We talk about the techniques of making things happen. We talk about design patterns and new deployment processes, that kind of thing. But what we don't talk about in these kinds of meetings and at conferences, that kind of thing, is the social and managerial aspects of what we have to live through every day. It's like we completely ignore that part in favor of the part we feel like we can control, the technology. We need to start talking about these things. It's the only way we're going to be able to help break out of these bad organizational incentives. And it keeps happening over and over again. We tell ourselves, you know what, I know that this last project that I worked on was horrifying. I know that I worked 80-hour work weeks, but now that I've done it, maybe the organization will understand. This time, this new project will be different. Because I got bad news, it's not going to be any different. They're going to continue using your goodwill against you. It's like, again, I apologize for the brutalness of this. It's like being in an abusive relationship. We've all had that friend whose car never ever seems to work. You know, hey buddy, I need you to give me a ride. And you give him a ride. But then 2 weeks later he needs a ride again. And he needs it again and again. It's not the kind of relationship you're rewarding him for not being able to do his work. He's using your goodwill against you. Or if it's in a romantic relationship of some sort. We all know somebody who is in an abusive relationship or is not being treated the way they should be, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. But I really love them, and you know, if I just keep being nice, they'll change. They don't change. It gets worse and worse until someone finally breaks off the relationship. And they go off. They think, you know what, maybe my next relationship will be different. They get into it, and the same things keep happening to them over and over again. Because the person who is in the relationship where the bad things are happening to them, they have not changed. They're the ones that are supposed to be in control of their own lives. What we need to do is figure out how to train others to treat us differently, because that's how life is. We train other people how to treat us by how we react to what they do to us. If you're going to do X to me, and I always do Z, they're going to expect that. But if I suddenly do something else entirely, they're not going to treat me that way anymore. So right now we're thinking, well, wait a minute. It's like Office Space, Michael Bolton. I'm not changing my name. He's the one who sucks. What? Why should I change? I'm the victim here. The organization is treating me badly. The organization is the thing that needs to change. I got bad news, man. They have no reason to change. So no one's coming to save you, is what it all boils down to. You're the one who has to change yourself, and then the organization might change as a result. In Ender, we've all read Ender's Game, right? Who saves Ender at the end? Who saves him? Nobody. He saves himself. The whole book is predicated on the idea that he has to believe that no one is coming to help him so that he can solve the problem at the end, if you haven't read the book. Harry Potter's the same thing. I forget which it is, Prisoner of Azkaban. Harry is in the forest. It's night. He's by this pool. The Dementors are swooping along, literally draining his life away. Who saves Harry? Nobody. He saves himself. Now, there's some time trickery involved. He comes back from his own future to say, but it's him saving himself. No one is coming to help you out. You're going to have to take care of this yourself. You are the one who's going to have to change your responses to how other people treat you. And then they will start treating you differently. You have to retrain them. So you're the one who has to do the work of change. Well, change sucks, frankly. But let's think about how to do that. So the first thing we do is, if we're going to do the work of change, we need to start by rethinking our relationship with the organization. So how long has everyone been here at their current job? How long have you been?
1 year.
1 year. How long?
Close to 2 years.
You? 2 years? How long have you been at your current job?
I'm freelance right now.
You're freelance. When's the last time you were employed?
That was for 7 years.
7 years. So that's unusual, yes?
1 year.
1 year. Folks, the average is about 3 years. You're not going to be in this organization for the rest of your life. You're not going to be there for 20 years. You're probably not even going to be there for 5.
Yeah.
There's only 2. Say it again.
No.
And there's,
situation is very different.
well, again, usual.
I do client work, and so projects come and go. But I started the company, so
Right.
it's like.
But your boss is.
One perspective, been in the same job since 1999.
Right.
When I was a teenager. Another perspective, projects last a couple of years, and then.
Believe it or not, that's exactly the same point. You're not going to be with this client for 20 years. And again, everything that I'm saying about organizations deals in client-consultant relationships as well. Why let a client treat you badly, man? There's only 2 ways this is going to end. Either you're going to quit, resign, or you're going to get fired or laid off. That's the only way this ends. If you know in advance that it's not going to be for that long, you're going to be leaving one way or another, why would you suffer through bad treatment for 2 years, 3 years of that? There's no need for that. So that's the first thing. You need to rethink your relationship. And right now, that's the first change we have to make. Anytime we make change, there's the psychological inertia that pops up telling us why we don't have to make the change. So these are the psychological inertia things coming up. But, well, I don't want to change. I mean, I like the work that I'm doing. I like the organization that I work for. They know that. That's why they keep giving you more to do in less time. Well, but I want to be seen as loyal. Absolutely. But loyalty is a two-way street. They need to be loyal to you as well. If they found someone who worked for half of what you're being paid, do you not think they would drop you in a heartbeat? Same thing here. Well, yeah, okay, maybe, but they're the ones who have the money. They're the ones paying me. That's true. But you're the one with the skills. There's a trade involved here. Well, okay, so I've got skills, I've got money, but I have to do what they say. They're the bosses, right? Well, technically, you don't have to do anything that you don't want to do. But Paul, I need this job. Maybe. We'll talk about that one in a minute. But what all of this boils down to, the psychological inertia that we have, comes down to this. We think we have no power in this relationship. We're the subordinates in it. And that is wrong. You are not a subordinate. You are an equal. There's this fantastic essay called How to Be a Programmer by Robert L. Reed that I really strongly suggest that you read. You can Google for this. I am going to read this to you because this is a hugely important piece. Engineers, us, developers, have the power to create and sustain. Non-engineers can order people around, but in a typical software company, they can create nothing on their own. They have only the power that engineers grant them. They can create and sustain nothing without engineers. Who has seen Labyrinth? Few people. What does she say? I forget her, Jennifer Connelly. I forget the character's name. What does she say to Jareth at the very end? She realizes, you have no power over me. She's been doing all this stuff and going through all these hoops and realized she had everything she needed right away. Right there at the beginning. Didn't need to be going through this. She had as much power as he had. The only reason he was able to do the things to her that he did was because she was letting him. So you're an equal in this relationship. You have a ton of power here. So now that we realize this, we need to recalibrate how we think about this relationship. Again, we know that it's only going to be for 2 or 3 years. We don't want to suffer through bad treatment. We realize that we are equals in this relationship. Now, how are we going to recalibrate how we think about it? The first thing is, by changing our relationship does not mean we are disloyal. It does not mean we are not committed. What it means is that we are now seeing ourselves as equals and not subordinates. And as part of that, we need to make sure that we set up our own attitude as one of an equal, our expectations as one of as an equal, and the responses that we give to requests also need to be the responses that an equal, not a subordinate or a superior for that matter, would give. When we do this, when we begin this recalibration, thinking about how we're going to change our relationship, one of the first things we have to think about is, what will happen in response? If I say no, what will happen? And there are different, yeah, exactly.
I'm famous with the group I work with for being, they were all a little afraid of the CEO because he has a very strong personality.
Right.
I'm the only one who said that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Of course, it can't work that way. And
Yeah.
that turned out pretty well.
I officially do not recommend that as a default position. But having...
The point is the relationship changes a bit after a few of those times. Not that you're being disrespectful, but it's like your positional authority
has nothing to do with reality, and I am here as an ambassador of reality. Yeah, no, dude, you're exactly right. Now, there are perhaps more tactful ways of doing that, but having said that, did you think in advance? I'm going to tell him essentially, hell no. Did you think? So I would advise think in advance what could happen, because it may be that the request is actually valid. You know, so what's the worst that could happen? Well, if the worst that could happen is the company dies in fire, you know, maybe you ought to say yes. You know, depending on how you feel about your employment there. But if the worst that happens is, as we were talking in the beginning, marketing isn't able to make a demo for the sales conference next week, you know, maybe that's not that big a deal. And again, I used to be in the Air Force, so my bar for what's the worst that could happen is someone gets dead or someone goes to jail in a court-martialing. That's a pretty high bar for most people. So my settings for that may not be your settings. As an equal in the relationship, you get to pick where your bar level is on this kind of stuff. But again, think in advance, what's the worst that could happen if I change the response from what I normally do? And then you can begin to deflect inappropriate demands that are made of you based on your own decision making, not just submitting to whatever they tell you, but think about, well, what's the worst that could happen? Yeah, I can live with that, and then make a decision based on that. This is how you begin to retrain other people on how to treat you. The core of all of this is to cultivate a new attitude internally as to how you see your relationship with your job. We said earlier, Paul, I need this job. And I used to think that this story came from the fountainhead from Ayn Rand. Think what you want about her. She's pretty good at describing a lot of interpersonal relations in business. I want you to imagine for a moment, and it turns out this story is not from the fountainhead. I apparently made it up myself. But our hero is an architect. He's in a job. He hates the job. The boss keeps making crazy demands of him. Doesn't like it. So our hero walks out of the manager's office, picks up his pencils and his papers, puts them under his arm, and begins walking out. The manager comes storming out of the office and says, "You can't quit. You need this job." And our hero turns around and says, "Sure, I need a job, but I don't need this job." This is the attitude that you need to cultivate. Sure, you might need employment, you might need work, you might need a job, but you don't necessarily need this one. You can find another one if you want to. And once you truly have this attitude that this is great, but I don't have to have it, I can move on to something else if I feel like it, then you can begin to exercise this power of being an equal in the relationship. If you can leave, you have the power to do that whenever you want and not suffer this treatment anymore if you don't feel like it. Then your actions, all of your decisions, everything that you decide to do on your own will start coming from a place of strength, one of being an equal in the relationship rather than from a place of weakness, being a subordinate in the relationship, a victim, as it were. So let's talk about this. We've decided that we're going to think about our relationship differently. We're going to recalibrate our expectations. We're going to start giving different responses from a place of strength because I need a job, but I don't need this job. Let's look at how that would play out in the example of overtime. And this is only one example. There could be any inappropriate demand being made of you in your organization. But this is like the most common thing that gets demanded of us. Schedule pressures, again, very common. Who here has read The Mythical Man Month? 1, 2, highly, highly recommended. The central essay, first of all, it's a collection of essays. written in 1975 about a project that ended in 1965, and everything in it is still true today. Every bit of it, except the bits about COBOL being the next language, next great language. The title essay, The Mythical Mammoth, is about how as you add people to a late software project, it gets later. It doesn't go faster, it goes more slowly. There are lots of reasons for this. He talks about them in there. But that's like but even in 1965, schedule pressure was a huge problem. Needed to figure out ways how to solve it. He talks about it in the essay. In this case, we're going to say the decision makers, the organizational managers, are the ones who have dictated a schedule to the developers. And you as the developers really didn't have any say in this. Maybe you've like complained a little bit. It's like, nope, we need it to happen. We need you to commit the organization. We need everyone to do what's necessary to make this project succeed for the company. Everyone means, of course, the developers, not the managers, because when it comes time to work on the weekends, it's not the managers who are there, it's you. Maybe QA's got it worse, because they only get to the project after you're done with everything and have to test everything else. So they're the ones who actually have it worse than us. So the boss comes to you and says, we're late. We need you to stay over for the next 8 weeks. We need 80-hour work weeks or whatever. Your response from weakness currently is, yeah, OK, boss, I'll do it. I want to be good. You know, be seen as loyal. And you start working nights, maybe an extra hour a night, maybe extra 2 hours a night. And then that's not enough, so you start working weekends. Then you start missing personal time, miss a birthday or two. And then eventually, the project gets put out, you know, you make it, but you're burned out. And what's your reward for it? Nothing. Thanks. You saved the company. Here's your next project. What's worse is if you're a manager, you're imposing this stuff on your own team if you're not able to push back yet. So you yourself are doing it, and then you're like saying, OK, team, we need to work 80-hour weeks, and you're hearing complaints from them too about missing personal time and birthdays, that kind of thing. And again, as we've seen, there's no feedback loop here, so the organization never changes. That's what we're currently doing in a lot of cases. But after we have recalibrated our expectations, we have set a new attitude of, I need a job, but I don't need this job, we're realizing that we're equals in this relationship. We're going to begin responding from a place of strength and not of weakness. So first of all, again, we need to calibrate properly. If they're making a demand of us, we need to figure out, is this a reasonable demand or not? And then proceed from there. Notice that asking is different from demanding. The boss comes to you and says, look, guys, I know this is tough, but we're really in a bind. If there's any way you can give a few extra hours or find some way to help this project get going a little bit faster because we're under a deadline, you know, that would be great. That's different from, yeah, I'm going to need you to come in this weekend. So that's the first thing. Second thing is this an emergency, or is this something that was completely predictable? If at the beginning of the project you said, you know what, I can see all the stuff going on, there's no way it's getting done in 3 months. And then 2 months later they say, we need you to work 80-hour work weeks. You can say, well, you know what, I kind of told you this was going to happen. Why didn't you listen to me? I mean, you hired me because I'm good at this. That's a very different thing from, oh my God, the server blew up over the weekend, or Amazon DNS went. That's reasonable if you've got to work the weekend to take care of that kind of thing. So again, is it an emergency or was it predictable? Again, if it was predictable, point out it was predictable. If it was predictable, who decided the schedule? Was it me? Well, why are you asking me to cover someone else's butt for having made a bad decision? Who else is going to be working on this over time? Is the person who made the decision working overtime on this with me? No? Well, why not? And finally, if you decide to say no to this demand, as it were, again, think to yourself, what's the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen is going to be different for different people in different organizations. Again, if $1 million is going to be lost per second if this doesn't happen, you know, maybe you want to do it. If it's not that big a deal, then maybe you don't want to do it. So when you decide, when you've recalibrated, whether you want to say yes or no to this, there are different ways of saying yes or no. And these are in order of essentially a flat no to a I'm happy to do it. The first no you can give is, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I have other commitments. You do have other commitments, if only to your dignity and your self-respect. You don't need to go into extended conversations about why you can't, what your other commitments are. It's like, boss, I've got other things. I'm sorry, I can't do it. The next thing you can do is, instead of like a flat no, you can point back to the manager and say, you know what? I've got 40 hours in the week. You've got these 40 hours filled doing these certain things. Which of those things do you want me to stop doing so I can do this other thing you have decided is really important? This is to impress upon the manager that you are a limited resource, You're not going to keep giving them all your time for free. They're the ones who decide how your time is to be used, but you're not going to give them extra time just because they feel they're in an emergency when it was actually predictable. Sort of the mediocre answer is, you know what, I get it, boss. I'll do what I can. I can't make any promises, but I understand this is a problem. I'll do what I can. This is actually the weakest answer of all of them. You should try to go with more of a yes or more of a no. One variation on yes is, yes, boss, I will do it. I understand you need me to work an extra 20 hours a week for the next 4 weeks. That's great. When do I get to take that as time off? Again, you're not trying to give them, they're trying to get stuff from you for free. You want to point out to them, look, I've only got so much time in the day. I don't want to be giving away my life to you for something I'm not going to be rewarded for. I need to get some of this back somehow. Or finally, and again, from strength, sure, boss, I can do this. I have decided this is important to me. It's important to the company. For my reasons, I am happy to give my overtime to you. Again, responding from strength does not mean turning down everything. It means you get to decide as an equal in the relationship what you're going to do. If you're a manager, you need to cultivate and honor these responses from the people you manage. Your job as a manager is not only to direct their work efforts, it's also to protect them from the depredations of the people above you. They're going to try and jump the chain and come down past you to your developers and say, you need to work 80-hour work weeks. Tell them that's not kosher. There's a chain of command for a reason. They're supposed to be coming through you for that. You are there to protect the guys that you manage. Especially make sure that in normal times, you send your guys home at the end of the day. So somehow, after 8 hours, if they spend 9, 10, 11 hours a day there in regular conditions, that becomes a normal work day. Everyone else is going to see them for 10 hours a day and think overtime means 12, not 9. So you as a manager, make sure that even your enthusiastic developers say, that's great, I'm glad you're working on this stuff, work on it outside of the office. If you're seen here, it's going to make expectations be that you're supposed to be here at all hours, and that's not an expectation we want to set. Again, your job is to both lead and defend these guys. Also, talk back to your upper managers. If you realize they are trying to cargo cult their way in this organization, point out to them, look, I get that you want a commitment, but you haven't given these guys the authority and autonomy that's supposed to come with a commitment. Alternatively, I understand that you want them to work according to a process, but that means that they need to be limited to 40 hours a week working through your process. They're not here to support, they're not here so you can put your failures on their backs. Does everyone get where I'm coming from on that? Now, people don't like it when you change. If you go through this and you change how you are reacting to organizational incentives, the first thing that's going to happen is the people who are used to you being a certain way are going, wow, what happened to you, man? They're going to resent this change from you. Both the people that are employing you and your peers, the people that are working with you, you're going to start going home at 8 hours. And the other people working 10 or 12 hours are like, wow, I wonder what's wrong. Is he sick? Something wrong? You do it again the next day, and the next day, and the next day, they're like, wow, he's not part of the team anymore. He's not pulling through the way we're pulling through. So you're going to get a lot of resentment from all sides. It's going to lead to bad reviews for your managers, especially if it goes on for an extended period of time, which is going to mean lower bonuses, fewer raises, that kind of thing. Then when they realize that halfway through the schedule, you're going to tell them, no, I'm not working 80-hour work weeks, they're going to ask you in advance, I need you to commit in advance to working 80-hour work weeks in case we need them. Don't do it. Say, look, I will decide then whether it's worth it or not. The worst case outcome of this is that you're going to get fired. They're going to say, you know what, you're suddenly not really a loyal, honorable employee anymore. You're not really helping the team. You need to go. And again, this is a result of you having changed your attitude after having been hired. They thought they hired person X, but then you changed your attitude, and now they look at you as person Z. They're like, okay, you're out. Now, having said that, depending on how far up or down the employment chain you're willing to go, how hard is it to find new work doing contracting or finding new employment in whatever your field is? Find new employment, what, 30 days, maybe? You could certainly find just a job that will get you through pretty quick, right? And then you can start with yes. The answer is yes.
I honestly think I could land something
a lot of people are in that situation. Now, it depends on your personal network. Some people it's going to take a couple of months. Some people take a day. For some of it takes a couple of weeks. But the point is that when you find, if you get fired, you can find a new thing. I need a job, but I don't need this job. I can find something else. The cool thing is you get to start with your new employer as your new self. That is the person they're hiring. The one who is standing up for themselves. The one who sees themselves as an equal in a relationship. No more resentment. All that stuff is gone. They know what to expect now. You've set your expectations in advance. You can start working with that new employer from that place of strength. Now, there's also the Office Space scenario, where if you change, and I've seen, yeah, where I'm just not going to, I'm not, it's a great movie. You know, so you're going to quit? No, I'm just not going to go anymore. Who here has not seen Office Space, by the way? I'm not trying to call anyone out. Okay, cool. So what happens? He gets promoted. We're going to put up to 5 people reporting to you. You know, it's great. Seeing that happen. After I first gave this talk, I received confirmation of this. A guy came up to me who was in the audience. He said, I went through exactly this. I was being treated badly by my employers. I was one of a small number of developers on the team. They kept demanding more and more and more. And one day I decided, you know what, I'm working it out. I'm going home at 5. Going home at 5. Going home at 5. At the end of the week, they say, we've noticed that you're going home at 5. Is everything okay? You see, everything's fine. He says, I'm just not doing this anymore. He said, well, you know, we really don't think that you're performing well on the team. We may need to rethink whether or not you're going to be staying here. He says, yeah, you're right, I quit. Right there. Not the answer they were expecting. They hired him back in 2 weeks as an independent contractor, twice the rate he was making. Again, not kidding. So this can be I'm not guaranteeing it's going to be a success. The failure outcome is probably the likely outcome here, but it can be good. And again, so it helps. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. We're going to need to do some things to put ourselves in a position to really exercise this power. But again, the point here is not to be a jerk. You're not trying to just, I'm big and I can make other people who don't. The point is to make the organization start treating people better, you know, to get it more towards one of these ideal forms, platonic forms, so that it stops cargo culting its way through its organizational structure and starts treating people better. And then in doing so, by making them feel the effects of their own poor decisions, you will gain the respect of the employers and the other employees and gain your own self-respect because you don't feel like a victim anymore. You feel like you're an equal in the relationship. Now, we've talked a lot about having power in the relationship. With great power comes... Oh, come on. Yeah, thank you. All right. Such enthusiasm. So the thing about this power is, again, just like in Labyrinth, you already have this. You can already do this. You don't need to get bitten by the radioactive spider. You don't need to build a Iron Man suit. You don't need gamma radiation. You can already do this. But it's going to be tough to exercise this power if you don't have some other things set up. Again, if I need a job, but I don't need this job, but I don't have any savings, I don't have any buffer, if I've got a lot of other responsibilities that make me feel like I need this one, because now I'm tied to it, you need to set yourself up so that these other things become less of a weight on you. The number one thing you can do is, who's here's heard the Dave Ramsey financial plan stuff? A couple of guys. One of the things that he talks about is you need to have 3 to 6 months worth of savings in cash in the bank. So if something bad happens, you can at least pay your bills. And again, there's some work involved in this. You're going to need to figure out what your minimum is and then start cutting back on everything else for a while to build up the savings. After you've done that, start killing off that debt, man. If you've got 2 cars and you're upside down on both of them, sell one. Get rid of that payment, man. Get yourself out of debt as soon as you can. It's amazing how freeing this is. If you don't have to service these debts from the money, from a job that you can't stand, suddenly, I need a job, but I don't need this one. I don't have all these other responsibilities. I can exercise this power to exit when I feel like it and really act like an equal in the relationship. And again, the idea here is when you exercise this power, I said this earlier, we're not trying to lord it over the organization. What we're trying to do is build respect and trust from the people that we're interacting with. We want to be seen as equals in the relationship, not as jerks. So there are constraints to how we use this power. When we've got this attitude, I need a job, but I don't need this job, I can leave when I want, you can't make me do anything I don't want to do. You're not here to be a jerk. You can use that power for good or evil. You need to maintain good character. You need to be honest and faithful and true with the organization. You need to exercise this in a way that other people see you as a person who has integrity, who is capable of shouldering responsibility, and who is capable of using these kinds of powers, treating themselves and others in an equitable way. When you exercise this power, when you decide that I'm going to bail or I'm not going to do what I'm being asked to do because I don't want to do it, because I don't think it's a reasonable demand, don't be defensive about it. An equal in the relationship does not say, well, I don't have to because I don't want to. There's no whining. There's no passive aggressiveness, none of that. Just say, whatever your decision is. Yes, I'll do it. No, I won't do it. But you don't need to give out these extended explanations as to why you're not doing it. You don't need to give ultimatums. Well, if you ask me again, I'm going to quit. You don't need to do any of that. Just stand up for yourself and say, you know what, I'm not going to do it. I'm sorry. And go from there. You need to maintain, like I say, you need to maintain your dignity. You're not here to submit to them, but you're also not to be superior to them either. Maintain your frame as an equal in the relationship. I've had lots of conversations with managers. They say, well, is this really the behavior of someone who's committed to the organization? The response to that kind of thing is, well, have I been treated as someone who has the authority in this organization to have a commitment of the kind you're asking for? Maintain your frame as an equal in the relationship. And finally, if you get to the point where you can't stand the job anymore, you don't need to rage quit. You don't need to flip the desk and go. Just stay at the job and start looking for other work. And when the time comes, say, you know what, I've found other work. It's been great. Good luck. I'm gone. You don't need to be angry about it. While you're there are still going to be disagreements. Previously, when you had disagreements with people, you were feeling like a victim, feeling like a subordinate. Maybe you didn't feel like you could disagree safely. But now that you're an equal in the relationship, you do feel like you can disagree, like you can present your point of view. When you disagree with people, do so in an agreeable manner. It's okay to state your position so that everyone else knows exactly what it is. There's actually a lot of work involved in this. You can't just say, well, I think X. You need to make sure that when you say that, you ask them, what do you think, the equivalent of, what do you think I just said? And make sure that they understand exactly what your position is with all of its subtleties and nuances. Because if they misunderstand, a little bit of that is on you as an equal in the relationship. So you need to make sure other people understand you in the way you intend to be understood. If they still don't agree, you know what? That's cool. They get to disagree. If the team decides that they're going to go along with position X, and you really think it's supposed to be that position Y would be better, that's cool. Team cohesion is still important. Say to the team, you know what? We're going to do X. I'm totally happy to do X, but I want everyone to remember that I said it ought to be Y, but we'll do X. That's cool. Then later, if it turns out that X was the right thing, fess up. You know what? I thought Y would have been better. I have learned something. X was the right thing to do. Right on, guys. If it turns out that Y was the right thing, you don't need to be a jerk. Say, look, we did X. Maybe Y would have been better because of the reasons that I said earlier. But again, you don't need to be disagreeable about this. You can just state it as a matter of fact. Finally, don't be a bully. We talked about inmates running the asylum earlier. One of the things that the author talks about in that is that in high school, for example, there are people who are physically powerful, the jocks or whatever. And they beat up on the physically weaker kids. But as soon as the jocks or whoever it is get out in the real world, they learned very quickly that physical intimidation of other people is not a socially acceptable behavior. And they modify that physical intimidation so they actually get along in the boardroom or get along in polite society. Unfortunately, intellectually powerful people do not receive a similar lesson. If you're intellectually powerful in high school, you're probably super competitive, and everyone in here is like this, super competitive with other people, intellectually speaking. But when we get out in polite society, we do not realize that it is also not polite to intellectually bully other people. And everyone here has either done this or been the recipient of it in some fashion. So when you're exercising this power, as an intellectual person, as a very mentally powerful person, do not attempt to mentally dominate other people with whatever tricks you've been using. Lots of people have different ways of doing this. You're still a social animal. You still need to interact with these people on a daily basis, And if you decide to leave the organization, you're going to see these people again at some point. I guarantee it. They're going to remember how badly you treated them later, so you need to keep that in mind. Don't burn any bridges if you decide to exit. So that's all I've got, folks. What we've talked about today is the different kinds of organizations and how they get mixed up in this cargo cult style organization where the incentives are all perverse and all the failures get laid on your back. How you are actually an equal in that relationship, and you can, and by cultivating a new attitude, I need a job, but I don't need this job, recalibrating and setting up different expectations, you can act like an equal in that relationship and use the power that comes along with that, so that you can act from places of strength and not from places of weakness. And in doing so, you do so with responsibility and integrity in a way that doesn't make other people feel like victims. You're just an equal in the relationship. By telling you all this stuff, by giving you these tools and pointing all this stuff out to you, I am not trying to make you into a monster within your organization. I'm just trying to put you ahead of the curve. Thank you very much for your time. Questions, absolutely, yeah. I left my bottle of water over there. Did I bring it over here?
I grab another
Maybe I'll take another. Oh, it's right here. It's right here. Never mind. Questions? Sir.
Yeah, do you have any more examples of where this has been successful? I know you had the example of the guy who quit and then got rehired. Do you have any more examples of?
I don't have examples that have been told to me that I can share. But I have had people come back to me and say that this actually mimics what's been going on in their personal lives. A lot of this is just personal relationship stuff applied to businesses with specific examples coming from organizations. But if you read any book on building up your own self-confidence, you're going to get this. You're going to hit exactly the same kind of stuff. For what it's worth, my father was a Methodist minister, and although I'm agnostic now, it is in my blood. So these kinds of stories, this kind of stuff is really appealing to me. There are a lot of people out there, talk about building self-confidence before, who are suffering in these kinds of organizations. Have no idea that anyone else is suffering like this. There's no need for it. So yeah, the examples are pretty much everyone who's been in a bad relationship. I know that's not a satisfying answer. That's the best I can do. Other questions?
One question I had is, I know, there's a number of junior developers, new developers that come to our meetup, and other folks that I run across. So for them, that the ease, you talked about the rank, how easy it is to find the other job. It can be more demanding and harder. So is there any specific advice you give someone in their first programming job, or someone who hasn't even landed their first programming job yet, as far as how they could apply these things at that point in their career?
So when I was in the Air Force, I was in Desert Storm, Desert Shield, and that was one of the first, I'm going somewhere with this, that was one of the first operations where you had reporters embedded with everyone else, and so the reporters would be talking to junior guys, junior enlisted folks. What do you think about the war? Do you think we ought to be doing this? And the order that we received was, that's fine, talk to the reporters, that's cool, but answer from your rank. That is, do not give a general's answer if you are a private. Answer as a private. So the answer to your question then is, when you're applying this, apply it from your rank. If you're a super junior guy, it might be totally reasonable to have a lot of demands placed on you that maybe you don't feel like you should, but you've got to earn your way in the organization. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
But again, this is part of the calibration effort. You have to be on. It does require a lot of introspection and reflection and honesty with yourself about where you are in the organization versus where you think you ought to be in the organization. Because it's very common for junior developers, for junior developers, especially self-taught ones, to come out and say, I am awesome, I should be running the project. But they're not, and it needs to be impressed upon them by their managers, by the guys who are slightly above them, that they are not, in as good a way as you can to make sure that they hear you, because sometimes they can't hear either. Does that kind of answer your?
Oh, absolutely, thank you.
I do a follow-up. If you find yourself in a job that you hate and you don't have $1,000 in your savings account that is not connected, that's the baby emergency fund that Dave Ramsey says, get that, and then you start having a few more options, and you can probably do that in a few months if you
Absolutely.
buckle down.
If you cut
Hopefully
back,
no one here is in that situation, but that's, the statistics
more
are pretty bad.
more people than is good are in that situation. What is it? 47% of people,
Like 50% is
50-some people don't have $500 in savings. Can't make it past their next paycheck. Can't do it. Have to run up the credit card. So again, I said earlier about introspection and reflection. Some self-discipline is necessary too in order to be able to pull this off. The point is, it is possible for you. A lot of people don't even believe they can pull this off. Can't pull it off at all. But if you've got some money in the bank, suddenly you feel a lot freer, man.
It's a lot easier to negotiate. Like,
The ultimate negotiation tactic is walking away. And that's the position where I need a job. Don't need this one.
true.
Do you
Other
have
question.
any advice, say like you're interviewing in another company, like what are good warning signs to look out for so you're not like
That's a
getting
fantastic.
hired into like a cargo cult?
That's a
like, you don't want to
fantastic
get hired
question.
and all of a sudden realize.
Ask the questions that I asked here. What's a normal work week like? Is it 40 hours, 80 hours, 60 hours? How often is overtime necessary? They're not going to like you asking these questions, by the way. What sort of decision-making authority are, and again, we said earlier, you need to ask from your rank. If you're being hired for a junior developer position, you're probably not wise asking for the financials on the company. But if you're being hired as a senior developer project manager, maybe that's a fair question. But again,
I've always found a really great question. I'm sorry.
no, please.
Always ask, especially if you're being interviewed by someone who's like a manager more so than just like a tech lead. Always ask about the business and how they make money and what makes them successful. And sometimes they'll just start like giving you a tour and telling you, because that's like what excites them. And it also means that you are paying attention to what serves the business, not just what your job is.
That's a fantastic answer. I'm going to use that. No, that's
Just shut up.
super,
Just
man.
like ask and then like enthusiastically listen.
And then you become a great conversationalist because you're letting them talk. That's fantastic, man.
Yeah, I think in my experience, any kind of asking questions back to them and really thinking about this idea of seeing yourself as an equal, even if you are junior level, it's like, well, just this dignity as a human, as an engineer that they're hiring to do a job, you're an equal in that sense. And so I think the last time I was looking for a job, really thinking in terms of I'm interviewing them too. Like they're interviewing me and I'm interviewing them. And again, like he's been saying, not in a jerk way. And if you really, really do need the job financially, like be kind of humble about it. But at the same time, it's like you really want to understand. And so I think that gets you into the mindset of asking things, and it also casts that vision so they understand. Talk about like setting the how they see you from the start. Oh, this is a developer who's interviewing us too.
You want to set your opinion on that, Josh?
But
Okay, this is awesome. If you interview with them and you don't think it went well, instead of waiting for the interviewer to call you back about the job interview, call them and say you really thought about it and you don't think it's a good fit.
now, is
So
that
here's
getting into the use of your mental power category?
Here's the problem, and I kind of ran into this. A year from now, when the job that you took fails, and you need to go back to the people that you were interviewing with before,
That may not work.
they may not actually want you back after that.
Yeah.
So it's best to be, my experience is, it's best to be a little bit cagey and let them believe what they want to believe. And if they want to be the one to let you go, let them be the one to let you go. Does that help? I especially like the interviewing them because he's exactly right. You are looking for a fit too, most of the time. Now again, I said earlier, if you're just looking for a job and you're just looking for a job, meet the bills, the Maslow hierarchy of fulfillment, self-fulfillment and self-actualization, maybe not what you're looking for. You're looking for the basic, get a paycheck so I can get through the next 6 months to do whatever. Don't tell them that, obviously. But that's what you're, so again, calibrating where you are and what you expect this relationship to be is entirely on you as someone, again, who is an equal as a person in dignity in the relationship.
Yeah, that helps a lot.
Another question I have is if this is a big need for our attenders of this meetup, like what can we do as a group to kind of grow in this and help each other? Would it be like discussing some of the books together that you reference? Are there other ideas?
Basically, if you can have, this sounds stupid, if you can have a bitch session, not about the technology stuff, but about what your managers are doing, if everyone in the room has the same story, that's a sign that we need to be doing something about that, what we can do about it. Then we start talking about, well, I know that person X at this job did this, they got fired, but they went on to something else that was better, or that worked out for them. Who here was you were talking about the agile stuff and how they took people out of that team and started moving them to other teams so that that behavior would be transmitted to other parts of the organization. What needs to happen is for these behaviors to be transmitted to different organizations. And the only way that's going to happen is if we talk about it among ourselves. Things will, and I don't mean to be mystical about this, the solutions will present themselves in due time once you've talked about it and thought about it. It may be stuff like, we were talking about this, we mentioned this earlier, getting the right self-help books and applying them to the situation.
Something else that helped there that I got to witness was a very daring developer who had a lot of demands coming on to him from a product owner who would, spew out some stories and well, not even stories at that time, just some Word docs with stuff scribbled in it and would run off.
Drive-by management.
Yeah, I mean, and they weren't like the part of the engineering management team, but they were the product team.
Yeah.
And he basically, I don't know what the right word would be, but an ultimatum, more or less, of if this project isn't important enough for you to come to our scrums every day for 5 minutes, then it's not important enough for me to work on. And
Ballsy.
he got our director's backing.
Right on. Right on.
But he was like, yeah, he saw what was going on. So that was the beginning of big changes within our group. Because, look, either if you're going to give us a task, a story, whatever, and you don't have the time to come, find a delegate. And if you can't do that, well, then we're not getting to it until you have time.
Right on.
And that changed everything.
There's
That's amazing.
that is absolutely. There's a term, the term is preference cascade. Everyone's at a dinner party, you've been there for 2 hours, 3 hours, kind of feeling like leaving, but you're not ready to go yet. Then someone says, it's time for me to go, they get the coat, and then everyone leaves all at once. It's exactly what happened. There was a preference cascade. There was already a set of opinions in place. No one was telling each other about it. They all kind of holding themselves because everyone else is going along with this. Yeah, I'll go along with this too. Until one person stands up and says, no, I'm not doing it anymore. And everyone else is like, yeah, I'm not doing it anymore.
Nobody wants to be the first.
No one wants to be the first.
Everybody wants to be the second.
And I talked about Ender's Game. I talked about Harry Potter. I talked about Labyrinth. Which of those people was go along to get along? They were go along to get along for long until they couldn't take it anymore. And then suddenly everything changed because they were the ones who stood up. That's it. That's how it works. Other questions? Y'all are a fantastic group. It's nice to hear everything. It's nice to see people thinking about this stuff and then talking about sharing the stories. It's awesome.
Thanks again for coming. We appreciate
I'm
it.
happy to do it.
Well, you can feel free to rush out if you want to get some rest. Hang out, have some more food. You guys, everybody, please do not leave without taking a sandwich. And don't feel like you guys need to rush out either.
I came down here with my wife and my son, who was a year old and who had suffered his first real